On a planet where more than 700 million people still survive on less than $2 a day, the image of poverty seems clear. Barefoot children in Mozambique, mothers fighting hunger in Venezuela, families crammed into slums in Latin America. In the collective imagination, poverty has a zip code. It is in the global south, Africa, Central America, and rural Asia. But what if I told you that there are people going hungry even in countries that top the quality of life rankings? Have you ever stopped to think about how poor people live in Japan, Switzerland, or Australia? Could it be that behind the postcard-perfect scenery, there are people counting coins for dinner? That's right. The OECD itself admits that 1 in 8 people in rich countries live in relative poverty, and the number is growing. The post-pandemic crisis, high energy prices, and global inflation have exposed what many pretended not to see. Even in the first world, there are people sinking without making a sound. If you follow Bello Mundo, you've seen us show you the other side of Australia, the one that doesn't appear on postcards, with mass alcoholism, institutional racism, and even deportation camps on isolated islands. But today we're going to go one step further. Did you know that there are Australians living in camping tents because they can't afford rent? That's right. In today's episode, we show you how the poor live in Australia and why this is becoming increasingly common. Number 1. Wealth and poverty. In Australia, everyone lives well. If you've heard that phrase, you might want to think again. The image of a rich and fair country hides a brutal contrast. Behind the skyscrapers and postcard beaches, millions of people live on the margins. Australia is indeed one of the richest economies in the world. According to global rankings, it is among the countries with the highest average wealth per adult. But this money does not reach everyone. Today, almost 1 in 8 Australians lives below the poverty line. That is more than 3.3 million people, a figure that places the country above the poverty average of the OECD, a group of the most developed nations on the planet. And the problem is not just poverty itself, it is inequality. The richest 20% earn almost 6 times more than the poorest 20%. It's as if there were 2 countries within Australia, one that travels first class and another that can barely afford to pay rent. All this in a place that loves to repeat the motto, fair go, the idea that everyone has equal opportunities. But in practice, those born in the wrong zip code carry the burden of a system that works against them from the start. Australia is rich, yes, but wealth has owners, and many people have been locked out. Number 2. What is considered poverty in Australia? When people talk about poverty in Australia, many imagine it to be an exaggeration. After all, we're not talking about extreme hunger or misery, as seen in war zones or forgotten regions of the planet. But the problem runs deeper, and the name for it is relative poverty. According to the OECD definition, a person is considered poor when they live on less than 50% of the average income of the population. Translating this into Australian reality, an adult earning less than $489 a week, or a couple with 2 children living on less than $1,027 a week, is already below the poverty line. Does that seem like a lot to those living in countries with weak currencies? It may be, but it isn't, because in Australia the cost of living is one of the highest in the world. With that money, it's barely enough to cover rent, food, transportation, and basic expenses. In 2020, this criterion placed about 14% of the population in poverty, more than 3,300,000 people. Among them, 760,000 are children. And here comes the cruelest part. Many of these poor Australians have homes, jobs, and cars. But they live on a knife's edge. At the end of the month, they can't make ends meet. It's the kind of poverty you don't see on the sidewalk, but it eats away at life from the inside. The routine of these families is marked by suffocating choices. Pay the electricity bill or fill the fridge. Buy medicine or put gas in the car. Skip a meal to save money for their child's school. Number 3. Who are the most affected? In the land of kangaroos, poverty has a face, a name, and an address. And it almost always hits the same targets: single mothers, indigenous peoples, recent immigrants, people with chronic illnesses, and low-income workers. Entire groups are pushed to the margins and often ignored by those who live in a bubble of privilege. Starting with single-parent families, usually headed by women. 34% of these households live below the poverty line. Worse still, almost 40% of children raised by a single mother face severe deprivation. The reason is brutally simple. Supporting a household on your own, caring for children, and still working part-time jobs, when you can find work, is an almost impossible task. Now, if poverty already hurts, being Indigenous in Australia is like living with a wound that has been open for generations. Aboriginal people here face a reality that more closely resembles modern-day apartheid. In 2021, the median household income for an Indigenous family was $825 a week, well below the $1,080 for the rest of the population. And 35% of these families are among the poorest in the country. And it's not just income. There is a lack of decent housing, basic services, and fair access to health care. The result? Aboriginal people live shorter lives, get sick earlier, face disproportionate police violence, and carry the weight of historical exclusion that has never been truly addressed. On the other side of the inequality divide are immigrants and refugees. Many arrive in search of safety, but find a new kind of hardship. It is estimated that more than 5,000 asylum seekers are living in Australia without any official assistance, depending on the solidarity of NGOs for food, shelter, and survival. They work odd jobs, in unstable employment, often under exploitative conditions, and pay extremely high rents in the suburbs of large cities. They are the working poor of the new millennium. They have jobs, but their income barely covers the basics. In short, the typical Australian facing poverty is not sitting around waiting for help. They wake up early, take crowded buses, work all day, and still end the month in the red. And an important addendum. When we talk about refugees here, we are not including those who are forcibly sent to prison islands like Nauru, a true institutionalized nightmare. There, things descend to a level of inhumanity that deserves a video of its own, and we've already made it. So, if you have the stomach for it, watch the special here on our channel. Nauru, life on the world's most obese and least visited island, poverty, corruption, and open-air prison. Believe me, after seeing that, you'll never look at Australia's immigration policy the same way again. Number 4. Sky-high cost of living. Australia boasts high salaries and a reputation as a developed country. But for many people, this image is nothing more than an illusion. Almost everything there is too expensive: housing, energy, transportation, food. Nothing escapes. And those who earn little feel the pinch first and hard. Rent alone, for example, has become a national problem. In 2024, the weekly average was already over $600 Australian dollars, and it wasn't a one-off spike. It rose by more than 8% in just 1 year. The result? Entire families being forced to choose between having a place to live or food to eat. According to Mission Australia, one of the country's leading charities working with social housing and supporting vulnerable communities, More than 2 million families have had to reduce the quantity or quality of their food in the last year. In low-income neighborhoods, food banks and community soup kitchens have become part of everyday life. Electricity has also become a luxury. In some regions, energy prices have risen up to 5 times. A study showed that a quarter of unemployment insurance beneficiaries spend more than 10% of their income on electricity and gas alone, double the limit considered sustainable. Transportation and groceries add to the bill. Those living on minimum wage in Australia need to perform miracles because the cost of living never lets up. Number 5. Low-income neighborhoods. And this is where the map of inequality is redrawn. Those who cannot afford to live in the center move further and further away until they settle in pockets that have become synonymous with affordable rent, at least on paper. The Australia that appears on postcards is only part of the story. There is another, far from the trendy beaches of Sydney or the hip cafes of Melbourne. Those who cannot afford to live in the center are pushed further and further away. Mile after mile, neighborhoods emerge where affordable rent comes at a different price. In Sydney, for example, Mount Druitt in the far west has become a symbol of this contrast. Unemployment there is around 10%, double the national average. Weekly income barely exceeds $600, well below the state average. It is a multi-ethnic community with many immigrants from Asia and the Middle East, but it is neglected by the government. There are not enough places in schools, hospitals are always crowded, and transportation takes so long that getting to work feels like a journey. Melbourne also has its own pockets of neglect. In Sunshine West and Broadmeadows, wages are low, houses are old, and residents live crammed into public housing or rented by several families at a time. In Broadmeadows, the average family income is nowhere near the poverty line, and dependence on social programs is well above average. These places were designed after the war for factory workers. Today, they are full of broken promises, poorly maintained streets, and a routine that resembles a ghetto more than a wealthy metropolis. But as bad as it is, people here still have a roof over their heads. Number 6. Housing crisis and homelessness. In the land of high wages, a roof has become a luxury. Australia is experiencing an endless housing crisis, and the numbers speak for themselves. In the last census, more than 122,000 people were homeless. And we're not just talking about those who sleep under awnings. There are people living in trailers, motorhomes, crowded hostels, or sharing basements with strangers. The problem is old, but it has gotten worse. The construction of affordable housing has not kept pace with demand, and property prices have almost doubled in a decade. Renting has become mission impossible, even for those who work. Yes, there is such a thing as the working homeless, people with steady jobs who still can't afford to pay rent. Teachers, nurses, truck drivers, sleeping in cars, parking lots, and even tents. Public shelters are overcrowded. Many families end up setting up makeshift villages in squares, green areas, or less busy sidewalks. The scenario that, for many, seems far removed from a rich nation has become routine. Social movements warn that most of the new homeless are poor workers, but the government still hesitates to acknowledge this reality. Today, having a job in Australia no longer means security. It means racing against time to pay the bills and hoping that, at the end of the month, there will still be a place to sleep. Number 7. Life on the streets, violence and prejudice. Living on the streets of Australia is not just a matter of cold or hunger. It is a matter of fear. People living on the streets face extremely high levels of violence. Assaults, aggression, and abuse are part of everyday life. And worst of all, there is almost never any legal protection. With no fixed address, no one to defend them, and no place to hide, the situation is even more brutal for women. It is estimated that more than 40% of the country's homeless population is female. Many hide, literally, to avoid rape or attack. They sleep behind dumpsters, in alleys, on dark street corners, fleeing from places that should be safe. And prejudice is relentless. In some cities, just setting up a tent is grounds for a fine. The presence of a homeless person is uncomfortable, and the official response is often simplistic. Go get a job. How if they don't even have a place to bathe? For Australian Indigenous people, the burden is twofold: poverty plus racism. Living on the streets as an Aboriginal person means being under constant harassment from the police, neighbors, the system. Official reports recognize that these communities are targets of almost daily discrimination. In the end, the street becomes not only a place of precarious housing, but also a battlefield, sheltering not only the unfortunate, but also the worst of social prejudice. Number 8. Another form of exclusion. Being poor does not just mean earning little. It often means living on the margins of everything: health, education, opportunities. The public health system promises universal access, but the reality is quite different. Consultations with specialists, long-term treatments, or even a simple trip to the dentist have become a luxury. Many people abandon their medication halfway through, or do not even schedule appointments because they cannot afford transportation. And this takes a heavy toll. Those who have less get sicker and live shorter lives. Among the Indigenous population, for example, life expectancy is almost 10 years lower than the national average, a stark picture of neglect. In education, the cycle of inequality begins early. Children from poor families attend schools with fewer resources, face more difficulties, and have less chance of getting into university. And when they do get in, they often arrive under pressure, dividing their time between work and study to make ends meet. It is the kind of disadvantage that lasts a lifetime. Even the idea of getting ahead in life runs up against reality. Starting a business or investing in a career requires money, time, and support. 3 things that are not always available. In the end, what looks like meritocracy turns into a rigged game. And those who are born with less almost always end up with less. Number 9. Public policy. On paper, Australia has one of the most generous welfare systems in the Western world. In practice, not quite so. The main benefit for the unemployed, job seeker, pays around $570 per week, below the government's own poverty line. During the pandemic, an extra supplement was created and, for a brief period, lifted thousands of people out of poverty. But as soon as the crisis cooled, the funds disappeared, and everyone was back to square one. Social housing, almost non-existent. Less than 5% of the country's housing stock is public. The waiting lists are miles long and last for years. Meanwhile, rents are skyrocketing. Energy vouchers and food baskets do exist, but they are slow, bureaucratic, and insufficient. Civil organizations such as ACOSS, the Australian Council of Social Service, and the Brotherhood of St. Lawrence are constantly demanding more action. They advocate a long-term plan, a real increase in the minimum wage, more emergency shelters, food subsidies, and mass construction of affordable housing. But what we see is the opposite: governments that prefer piecemeal adjustments to real reforms. Meanwhile, millions continue to struggle to make ends meet in a system that was flawed from the start. If Australia really wants to tackle poverty, it will need more than promises. It will need courage and urgency. Number 10. The future of inequality. As you can see, the responses so far have been timid. governments announce poverty reduction targets, promise to build more affordable housing, and expand emergency food programs. But everything remains provisional. A little money is allocated here, a pilot project there, speeches about social inclusion that never get off the ground. Meanwhile, reality waits for no one. The number of tents in parks is growing, shelters are full, and thousands of workers still have nowhere to sleep after work. Recent research by Monash University, one of Australia's leading universities, renowned for its social and public policy studies, shows that doubling investment in social housing and income transfer would have a direct impact. Poverty could be halved by the year 2050, and inequality would shrink by up to 30%. This projection is also reinforced by ACOS. They have been pressuring the government for years for a long-term plan, something that goes beyond emergency adjustments and campaign promises. But for now, the solutions remain palliative, and those who live on the margins continue to wait. The question remains, will Australia face this abyss head-on, or will it continue to sell the image of paradise while hiding shacks under the bridge? Now it's up to you. Did you ever imagine this other side of the story? Do you know anyone who has experienced something similar? Leave a comment, and if you want to continue discovering what the postcards don't show, subscribe to Bello Mundo. There is still a lot of reality to reveal.